There's a lot of people furious about Caitlin Clark making this AP all-time list.
Rebecca Lobo, a name synonymous with profound respect and insightful commentary within the echelons of women's basketball, has unexpectedly been thrust into the very eye of an unforeseen tempest, having played a pivotal role in the meticulous curation of the Associated Press all-time women's college basketball team. Her consequential decision to enshrine Caitlin Clark onto that hallowed elite roster has, with explosive force, ignited a fervent wave of visceral outrage that reverberates across the entirety of the basketball world. Devoted fans, venerable former players who once graced the courts, and even astute analysts are now vociferously questioning the fundamental merit of Clark's inclusion, debating whether she truly warrants a coveted position among undisputed legends whose names echo through history, titans like the incomparable Diana Taurasi, the transcendent Cheryl Miller, and the unparalleled Candace Parker. The debate is fierce, the opinions deeply divided, and Lobo finds herself at the epicenter of a passionate discourse challenging the very criteria of basketball greatness.
Caitlin Clark making the AP all-time college women's basketball player list. She was on there with the greats like Candace Parker, Cheryl Miller, and a host of others.
What was meticulously intended as a jubilant moment of collective celebration within women's basketball swiftly and unexpectedly devolved into a maelstrom of searing controversy, immediately igniting accusations that Rebecca Lobo's pivotal choice was fundamentally driven by ephemeral popularity rather than an objective assessment of enduring merit. The ensuing backlash has metastasized with astonishing velocity, and now, the very community that once reverently lauded Lobo's indelible legacy is paradoxically turning against her with palpable indignation. Yet, as the crescendo of public outrage swells to deafening proportions, one profound question stubbornly persists, hanging heavy in the charged atmosphere. Did Rebecca Lobo, in her audacious decision, make a truly bold and ultimately fair assessment, or has she, in a single defining stroke, committed an irreparable, career-damaging mistake that will forever alter her esteemed narrative?
When she was in college, she was like that. Now, granted, Caitlin Clark did not win a national title, but her achievements alone overshadowed any national title she could have ever won. I mean, the young lady came in and transcended the game of women's basketball. She's the best scorer in male or female basketball, bro. Male or female. Y'all do know that, right? I mean, people act like everything Caitlin Clark achieved was like, I don't know, video game stats.
The unveiling of the Associated Press's all-time women's college basketball team was meticulously crafted to be a moment of pure celebration, an overdue historic homage to the sport's most transcendent and dominant figures. Yet mere moments after its highly anticipated release, the digital landscape of social media erupted, instantly transforming into an impassioned, contentious battleground. At the very epicenter of this unforeseen storm stood Rebecca Lobo, a revered Hall of Famer and an iconic former UConn star, whose pivotal role in the compilation of this monumental list suddenly brought her into the crosshairs. Her inclusion of Caitlin Clark, the prodigious record-shattering scorer from Iowa, swiftly escalated into the undisputed lightning rod for the ensuing widespread controversy, sparking intense debate and divided opinions across the basketball universe.
Caitlin Clark was cold in college, but ain't no way in hell she better than Maya Moore. What is you saying? Maya Moore was second team, bro. CC the point guard on this team, bro. Facts, bro. Facts.
For an undeniable legion of fervent fans, Clark's contentious placement on that esteemed list served as irrefutable validation, a triumphant moment that powerfully reaffirmed their deeply held conviction. Caitlin's collegiate career was unequivocally nothing short of legendary. She didn't merely dominate the court with her unparalleled skill, she fundamentally revolutionized the very paradigm of how fans engaged with and consumed women's basketball, single-handedly drawing in unprecedented record-breaking television ratings and electrifying arenas that had, until her arrival, never witnessed such explosive energy or fervent devotion. Yet, for an equally vocal contingent, particularly the purists who rigidly prioritized championship banners and indelible legacies over ephemeral highlight reels, this audacious decision felt nothing less than sacrilegious. The burning question echoed with incredulity. How could a player who never hoisted a national title stand shoulder to shoulder with etched-in-history icons such as the formidable Maya Moore, the versatile Candace Parker, and the indomitable Diana Taurasi, whose careers are defined by ultimate victory? The chasm between these perspectives intensified the already heated discourse.
She doesn't have a ring to her name. Who gives a damn? These are individual accolades. By your thinking, many notable NBA or WNBA players who have never been named for these types of awards. I am aware, but Maya Moore is still far better individually than... Bro, Maya Moore is not better than Caitlin. Bro, y'all understand Caitlin Clark is Michael Jeffrey Jordan, bro. I mean, Michael Jeffrey Jordan, bro. Like, why is it so hard for people to real life understand? Caitlin Clark is Michael Jeffrey Jordan, bro.
As the impassioned debate surrounding the controversial list escalated into a full-blown societal skirmish, incriminating screenshots of Rebecca Lobo's previous comments began to circulate with viral velocity across social platforms. In a revealing interview, she had candidly confessed that the monumental task of ranking players was extraordinarily difficult, especially when attempting the delicate, often impossible, separation of collegiate performance from the glittering achievements of professional accomplishments. That singular, seemingly innocuous line swiftly transformed into potent ammunition for a chorus of vocal critics who wasted no time in accusing her of overt bias. They vehemently argued that she had permitted the powerful sway of recency bias and overwhelming popularity to fatally cloud her objective judgment, asserting that she had unequivocally elevated Clark because of her pervasive media fame and magnetic charisma rather than the tangible, hard-earned glint of her trophies. The perception of unfairness fueled the fire.
So Rebecca Lobo is one who kind of put this thing together. She stated it was extraordinarily difficult, especially to try to hone in on one player college career and eliminate their pro career from your brain. Lobo added, there are going to be players who are Hall of Fame caliber players who aren't on the list.
The internet, with its predictable and relentless efficiency, did precisely what it always excels at. It's spectacularly divided. Caitlin Clark's fervent supporters immediately flooded the platform formerly known as Twitter with an overwhelming barrage of irrefutable statistics, each one meticulously presented to validate her undeniable worth. They highlighted her undisputed status as the NCAA's all-time leading scorer, the prolific record for most three-pointers ever made, a staggering collection of multiple Player of the Year awards, and an unprecedented, record-setting number of double-doubles. Her opponents, however, swiftly countered with a formidable display of championship banners and the enduring legacies forged by legendary teams, emphatically reminding everyone that true dominance extends far beyond mere individual numbers. The impassioned conversation rapidly spiraled beyond the confines of basketball, devolving into an archetypal generational clash. Older, traditionalist fans fiercely defended the hallowed old school legends, their arguments rooted in historical reverence, while a vibrant wave of younger fans enthusiastically hailed Clark as an emblematic symbol of progress and evolution, a modern-day great who had unequivocally transcended the sport's traditional, often rigid, boundaries.
Maya Moore, the Diana Taurasi level, but okay, LOL. Maya Moore's second team replaced Caitlin Clark with Cheryl Swoops. What the hell? Replace Caitlin Clark with Cheryl Swoops. Somebody said I would have to agree. I did know Moore won 2 Player of the Year and not number one. She should be first team. I don't give a damn. This is college. This is college.
Rebecca Lobo, amidst the escalating cacophony, maintained a conspicuous and unwavering silence. The very woman who had for so long epitomized grace, intellectual balance, and unparalleled insight on ESPN broadcasts now found herself starkly caricatured, painted by the polarized masses as either an audacious visionary or an outright villain. A vocal contingent of her accusers fiercely contended that she was subtly safeguarding UConn's hallowed legacy, strategically ensuring the inclusion of multiple Huskies on the prestigious list, while simultaneously elevating Clark as a calculated calculated maneuver to deftly silence any potential critics. Conversely, an equally passionate faction lauded her as that rare, courageous figure who dared to challenge the entrenched system, boldly recognizing a player who had fundamentally reshaped the very fabric of the game without conforming to its often rigid, antiquated definitions of traditional success. Her actions, or lack thereof, became a Rorschach test for the basketball world.
If you're talking college, bro, records achieved and milestones, all-time NCAA Division I scoring leader, men's or women's, bro. Most three-pointers in Division I history, 548 threes. Come on, bro. Big Ten all-team leader in points and assists. First team player, men's or women's, bro, to score at least 1,000 points in 2 different seasons. Michael Jordan, dog. One player in NCAA history to lead her conference in both scoring and assists in 4 consecutive seasons.
This was far from being just another ephemeral debate about player rankings. It was unequivocally a profound reflection of a much larger, deeply rooted struggle within the very soul of women's basketball. The entrenched tension between revered tradition and unstoppable transformation, and at the tumultuous epicenter of that fierce ideological tug-of-war stood Rebecca Lobo, undeniably caught in the maelstrom between 2 distinct eras, violently colliding in real time. The initial backlash was merely the nascent tremor of a much larger seismic event, and as the sensational headlines rapidly proliferated, it became chillingly clear that this controversy would not, under any circumstances, recede quietly into oblivion. What had innocuously begun as a seemingly straightforward list had, with explosive force, just detonated into a full-blown cultural reckoning, and with every escalating ripple, Lobo's once unimpeachable reputation was now perilously on the line, threatening to define her legacy in an entirely new, controversial light. 2.7s.
This picture alone sums up everything. That's why her name is hanging in the rafters at Carver, bro. I don't give a damn how you feel. I don't give a damn that you mad that your favorite WNBA player didn't make the list or Caitlin Clark passed up some of y'all greats. But I don't care. Caitlin Clark, it's Michael Jeffrey Jordan. And we all know who Michael Jeffrey Jordan is. We need not talk no more. We need not talk no more. Because that's how profound. He worked 23, she worked 22. You got to be 21, 22, 23, 24 to be even considered in this conversation of greatness.
In the world of sports commentary, some names are synonymous with integrity. They are the voices of reason, the pillars of credibility built over decades of fair analysis and deep respect for the game. For years, Rebecca Lobo was one of those names. A UConn legend, a WNBA pioneer, and an Emmy-winning broadcaster, she was universally regarded as an unimpeachable authority in basketball, which is precisely why what happened next was so stunning. In the blink of an eye, Rebecca Lobo went from being one of the most respected figures in sports to the unwilling villain in a digital firestorm that threatened to burn down the very reputation she had so carefully built. This wasn't just a debate, it was an implosion, and it all started with a single controversial name on a list: Caitlin Clark. What truly stunned a multitude of observers wasn't merely that Clark, the Iowa phenom, was included on the AP all-time team. It was the breathtaking speed with which the admiration Rebecca Lobo had commanded for years transmuted into a searing wave of unbridled fury. The very instant Clark's inclusion was confirmed, with Lobo's name listed on the selection committee, the digital battlegrounds of social media exploded. Comment sections were instantly flooded with a torrent of vehement accusations. Longtime devotees, fans who had followed Lobo from her championship days at UConn all the way through her distinguished broadcasting career, began a chorus of censure. They accused her of a profound betrayal, of selling out and playing politics. The narrative quickly formed that she was shamelessly chasing clicks and sensational headlines rather than serving as the steadfast guardian of the sport's purity. Within mere hours, accusatory hashtags like #LoboBuzz and #APL It's Rigged began to aggressively trend, dominating the online discourse. This was far from just a few disgruntled fans venting. The controversy quickly drew in revered former players and astute analysts, some subtly casting shade on Lobo's judgment, while others openly lambasted the decision as fundamentally disrespectful to legends like Maya Moore and Cheryl Swoops. One former coach, in a particularly scathing rebuke to a local sports outlet, articulated the prevailing sentiment that Lobo should know better than to let recency bias dictate history. That single inflammatory quote ignited yet another ferocious wave of public debate, forcefully thrusting Rebecca into an acutely uncomfortable spotlight she had never sought. For years, her commentary was fair, her tone diplomatic, and her respect for the game's integrity was utterly unquestioned. This is why the backlash hit so differently. To a vast segment of her audience, she hadn't just made a mistake, she was seen as having fundamentally betrayed her own sacrosanct standards. The outrage was swift and brutal. Fans, fueled by indignation, began digging up archival clips of her past pronouncements, specifically those where she passionately discussed the arduous process of earning greatness through legacy, strategically wielding her own eloquent words against her. Suddenly, every prior statement she had ever made regarding the importance of hard work, titles, and consistency was unsparingly reinterpreted through the damning lens of perceived hypocrisy. In stark contrast, Caitlin Clark's defenders were incisive in their counter-response, boldly asserting that the visceral outrage wasn't genuinely about basketball principles at all. Rather, it was a thinly veiled manifestation of generational envy. They argued that an older, more traditionalist faction simply couldn't accept that a young player from Iowa, not a perennial powerhouse like UConn or Tennessee, had fundamentally altered the sport's entire trajectory. Clark's indelible impact, they contended, was undeniable. She filled arenas, boosted viewership by millions, and brought scores of previously disengaged men's basketball fans into the women's game. To this cohort, Lobo's decision wasn't misguided. It was a righteous act of giving credit where it was unequivocally due. Once the backlash caught fire online, traditional media outlets wasted no time in amplifying the chaos. What had begun as a heated sports debate rapidly metamorphosed into a full-blown national story. Giants like ESPN, Fox Sports, and The Athletic dedicated extensive features to dissecting the selection process, placing Rebecca Lobo's role under an intense, unforgiving microscope. Viral clips of irate sports talk hosts labeling the list a joke proliferated at an astonishing rate. The controversy had become a ratings magnet, and Rebecca Lobo, who had for so long epitomized sports class and credibility, was now paradoxically cast as the unwilling face of its most divisive debate in years. Television panels convened for hours, with prominent anchors directly questioning the impartiality of the committee. Some pundits argued that Clark's inclusion symbolized progression, a recognition of modern greatness measured by influence, not just championships. Others scoffed, claiming the sacred legacy of the game was being rewritten purely for clicks and clout. In one fiery on-air segment, a panelist declared, "If this list was made 10 years ago, Clark wouldn't even be a runner-up. This is the social media era, changing the standards." That quote spread like wildfire, and almost instantly, the narrative shifted from celebrating players to questioning the very credibility of the selection process itself. Meanwhile, Lobo's continued, conspicuous silence only added more fuel to the raging inferno. Viewers, accustomed to her calm, incisive analysis, now interpreted her refusal to comment as an implicit admission of guilt or a profound lack of accountability. Rumors circulated that influential ESPN producers had advised her to stay quiet until tensions cooled. Yet, paradoxically, her silence was interpreted by many as an arrogant display, as if she believed herself to be above public criticism. For an individual who had built a career on transparency and respect, that perception was, undoubtedly, a living nightmare. The backlash intensified when an old, seemingly innocuous interview clip resurfaced with devastating effect, in which Lobo had effusively praised Maya Moore as the unequivocal gold standard of college greatness. Fans, seizing upon this apparent contradiction, aggressively shared it alongside Clark's stats, vociferously accusing Lobo of patent hypocrisy. The clip racked up millions of views, powerfully establishing a narrative that she had flagrantly abandoned her core principles to chase media trends. Even respected former players like Swin Cash and Simone Augustus were compelled to address the controversy, each offering politely worded, yet pointed, responses that only served to deepen the palpable divide. The story was no longer solely about an all-time list, it was now inextricably linked to Rebecca Lobo's character, her professional judgment, and the harrowing question of whether one singular decision had irrevocably undone decades of painstakingly earned respect. After days of trending hashtags, heated debates, and an unending deluge of social social media chaos, Rebecca Lobo finally broke her silence. Fans had been holding their breath, awaiting any sign that she was aware of the formidable storm brewing around her. When she finally chose to speak, it wasn't during an ESPN broadcast or a press conference. It was through a quiet, meticulously worded post on her personal social media account, which read, "The AP list wasn't about popularity, it was about impact. Every player on that list changed the game in their own era, in their own way." That single paragraph immediately ignited a second, equally intense wave of reaction. Her supporters viewed it as a composed, dignified defense of her integrity, a clear signal that Lobo was resolutely refusing to back down. Critics, however, interpreted it as dismissive, a clever maneuver to sidestep what they perceived as the dilution of greatness. Lobo's message was unwavering. She viewed Caitlin Clark as more than a stat sheet. She held a firm conviction that Clark's unprecedented influence, from record-breaking TV ratings to the explosive surge of public interest in women's basketball, was more than enough to justify her spot among the greats. She argued that the very definition of greatness evolves, and that profound influence can be every bit as powerful as championships. "You can't measure impact by rings alone," she elaborated in a subsequent interview. "If that were the sole criterion, we'd be overlooking half of what truly makes a player legendary." However, that nuanced explanation failed to satisfy everyone. Former players claimed the metrics for impact were never made clear. One prominent WNBA veteran even went viral for pithily remarking, "So now social media followers count as trophies." The biting sarcasm resonated across platforms, relentlessly fueling the notion that Lobo had conveniently moved the goalposts to accommodate a popular modern favorite. Despite the criticism, a surprising wave of support began to rise. Younger fans and progressive analysts applauded Lobo's willingness to challenge outdated hierarchies. To them, Clark represented a bold new era, one where visibility, inspiration, and cultural connection held as much value as banners hanging from rafters. Yet beneath Lobo's composed exterior, sources claimed she was profoundly shaken by the personal attacks. She had spent years earning respect as both an athlete and a broadcaster. Now that credibility was being fundamentally questioned. Her colleagues at ESPN reportedly encouraged her to take a temporary leave, but Lobo, with characteristic defiance, steadfastly refused. "I've spent my whole career teaching young women to stand firm," she confided to one insider. "Now I have to live by that." By resolutely defending her decision, she had inadvertently reignited the fervent debate, and as the spotlight burned ever brighter, the question loomed: had Rebecca Lobo salvaged her reputation, or had she merely cemented herself as the reluctant symbol of a battle she could never truly win? If Lobo's statement was intended to quell the storm, the exact opposite happened. The situation escalated when several respected retired legends, who had either been excluded from the list or ranked lower than expected, began publicly articulating their frustrations. One of the first was Sheryl Swoopes, a three-time Olympic gold medalist, who declared, "You can't rewrite history because someone had a hot 2 years." That quote immediately went viral, igniting a fresh firestorm that reignited the simmering generational divide. Soon after, former teammates of the iconic Maya Moore began to weigh in, passionately reminding everyone that Moore had led her teams to an astonishing 4 national championships and had been the quintessential face of women's college basketball long before Caitlin Clark. Their collective message was clear: true greatness is not solely defined by individual statistics, it is linked to sustained dominance and winning when the stakes are highest. Candace Parker, renowned for her diplomatic demeanor, offered a subtle yet pointed comment during a broadcast, remarking, "Lists like these are always tricky. I just hope people remember that longevity and success over time still matter." Fans immediately interpreted this as a thinly veiled jab at both Lobo and Clark. Suddenly, the discussion wasn't just about the controversial list anymore. It was profoundly centered on the very definition of greatness itself. In numerous sports circles, the situation was being starkly described as Lobo versus the legends. Some accused her of disrespecting the Trailblazers, who had constructed the very edifice of the women's game. Others believed she was being unjustly scapegoated for daring to acknowledge that the sport had evolved. The backlash from the legends carried immense weight. It wasn't just public opinion turning against Lobo, it was her esteemed peers, women with whom she had once shared locker rooms and podiums. For an individual who had built her career on respect and unity, that division inflicted a deeper wound than any amount of anonymous online criticism ever could. She had consistently championed women's basketball as an unbreakable sisterhood. Now that very sisterhood was openly questioning her professional integrity. The debate had expanded far beyond a single list. What erupted as outrage over Caitlin Clark had evolved into a seismic clash between distinct eras, divergent values, and competing visions of what women's basketball should represent. Sports radio hosts relentlessly pitted the ring generation against the rating generation. Traditionalists argued that Lobo was disrespecting the legacy of players who had toiled in obscurity, scraping for media coverage long before the sport garnered mainstream attention. They perceived Clark's meteoric rise, fueled by viral highlights and NIL deals, as an unearned shortcut to glory. Younger fans fired back instantly, interpreting that criticism as petty jealousy. To them, Clark was actively breaking barriers that older players had fought to open. "She's not replacing the past," one fan eloquently tweeted. "She's building on it." Rebecca Lobo became an unintentional symbol of change, a crucial bridge between the venerable old guard and the dynamic new. Her own career spanned both worlds. She had endured the struggle for visibility, and now she bore witness as a new era thrived in the spotlight. But the more she tried to explain her justification, the more polarized the responses became. The profound irony was lost on no one. The very person who had once effortlessly unified the sport through her professionalism had now unexpectedly become the quintessential face of its most pronounced division. As the debate raged on, something entirely unexpected began to unfold. What had started as a vitriolic backlash against Rebecca Lobo began to subtly morph into a much larger self-reflection across the basketball world. Commentators who had initially piled on with criticism started acknowledging that perhaps the initial outrage had gone too far. A collective realization began to dawn that Lobo's decision wasn't a careless act of favoritism, but a courageous attempt to bridge the past and the present, even if it meant enduring the barrage of punches that accompanied such a bold stance. A few respected voices began publishing op-eds defending her position, arguing that Clark's inclusion wasn't about erasing legacies, but about acknowledging how fundamentally the game had evolved. One impactful headline proclaimed Lobo saw the future. The rest of us just weren't ready. Simultaneously, clips of Caitlin Clark gracefully praising the legends who paved the way for her began circulating again, reminding fans that Clark herself had never claimed to have surpassed anyone. She frequently and humbly asserted that she stood firmly on the shoulders of the greats. That humility softened the tone of the discussion and cast a more sympathetic light on Lobo's choice. Perhaps she wasn't crowning Clark as the best ever, but rather recognizing that Clark represented something entirely new and vital to the growth of the game. Meanwhile, the sport itself was booming. TV ratings continued their upward trajectory, merchandise sales soared, and even the most entrenched skeptics began to admit that Clark's cultural reach was unlike anything the sport had ever witnessed. Suddenly, Lobo's earlier words, "You can't measure impact by rings alone," no longer sounded so inflammatory. Instead, they began to sound remarkably prophetic. Eventually, even some of her most vociferous critics began to soften their tone. Cheryl Swoops appeared on a podcast and candidly admitted, "I might have gone too hard. Caitlin's earned her place in history. Maybe not the same way we did, but it's real." That powerfully honest moment went viral and shifted public sentiment almost overnight. By then, Rebecca Lobo had weathered weeks of relentless criticism and personal attacks, but when the dust finally began to settle, her reputation did not collapse. Instead, it remarkably evolved. She was no longer just the respected commentator who made a controversial choice. She became the face of uncomfortable yet necessary progress, and in that moment of re-evaluation, the very outrage that had once threatened to destroy her legacy ended up, paradoxically, strengthening it instead. Weeks after the firestorm subsided, Rebecca Lobo's name began to recede from the outrage cycle. Her return to the ESPN broadcast booth was met with curiosity rather than hostility. When she appeared on air, fans flooded the live chat with supportive messages. "You stood your ground. You changed the conversation. Respect." In a candid interview, she reflected on the experience. "I learned that passion cuts both ways," she said. "When people care deeply about the game, they'll fight to protect it. I never wanted to divide anyone. I just wanted to recognize that greatness can look different in every generation." generation." Those words resonated far beyond basketball, striking a universal chord. By then, Caitlin Clark had also addressed the controversy with her characteristic grace. "Rebecca Lobo didn't have to put me on that list," she remarked, "but she did, and I'll spend the rest of my career trying to prove she was right." The conversation Lobo ignited began to fundamentally reshape how women's basketball was discussed. Analysts started evaluating players not just by their trophies, but by their impact on the sport's growth, visibility, and culture. The groundbreaking idea that a player's legacy could encompass influence and inspiration became a mainstream concept. What was once criticized as bias became in time celebrated as foresight. By the culmination of this saga, Rebecca Lobo's legacy had taken on a new depth. She was no longer just a Hall of Famer or a respected commentator. She had become a powerful figure who challenged an entire generation to rethink what true greatness really means. The backlash that threatened to silence her had instead solidified her place as one of basketball's true thought leaders, a woman unafraid to absorb the hits so that the next generation could thrive in the amplified spotlight she had courageously helped to construct.